real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Nathan Romas with you. Today, we're going to be talking about some national security topics, politics, and the culture of security institutions. For that, I have Daniel Stanton on the program. Dan is a former executive manager with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He dedicated over 30 years to both national and international security issues. He worked in fields of counterterrorism and espionage and counterproliferation. He is now the director of the National Security Program at the University of Ottawa Professional Development Institute and a regular contributor to media as an expert on these same topics. So welcome, Dan.
Oh, it's great to be here, Nathan.
Yeah, no, we kind of got fired up here and we're saying, I think we originally scheduled this maybe like 2 months ago, or we were talking about scheduling this, and so much has changed in the world. Things are moving at a fast pace right now. So I'm glad to get you in because I look at a lot of your stuff on LinkedIn and you put out some really good content, and I like looking at your critiques and criticisms of some of the articles out there. So I really appreciate your point of view on things. But I'd like to, before we get into the heavier topics, talk about you. So if you could kind of give the audience an idea of where you come from and how you got into this whole world, this crazy world of things.
Sure. I mean, it's just funny. I think like everybody, how you end up somewhere. I, grew up in Ottawa, went away to university, ended up in Toronto working retail. But I had applied to the security service of the RCMP shortly after I finished university, and I completely forgot about it. And then 3 years later, I got a call, and they were hiring investigators for a new organization. The long and the short of it, I ended up waking up one morning at Camp Borden with 32 other just as bewildered strangers from across the country, training to be investigators. They wanted to fill vacancies in the regions for this new organization. And then I ended up in Toronto region, did my first 7 years there, working what we called Soviet anti-Soviet operations. It was the KGB desk. And I was very fortunate because I was the first non-Mountie in this particular section in counterintelligence. And while it was a new organization, it was only a year and a half old, they had 40 years of experience, not individually, but collectively, the tradecraft, the methodology, working against these very sophisticated targets. Because the threat environment hadn't changed in decades. And so I kind of, bit of a quiet guy, I kind of listened a lot and did all the jobs, did the walk-ins, they called them. They were usually people with tinfoil hats. and learned. And so most of what I learned as an investigator in intelligence work, I got from those ex-members of the RCMP who chose to stay in this new organization. And because their work didn't really change. The only thing that changed is they didn't have a badge and they were no longer in the force, but their data work and their expertise and their commitment and everything hadn't really changed. So I was quite fortunate, I think, in where I landed, and very quickly ended up, recruiting sources and handling sources and double agents, and which beat the hell out of selling shoes in Toronto.
Quite a different job.
Yeah, and it was great. Like I say, the motivation was high. We had an attitude, I think my classmates, we all shared, where you sign up for the whole movie. You're gonna commit your life to this. Much as in other vocations as well, and for Canada security. So it was all win-win.
Yeah. Well, what kind of drove you into this in the first place? Like, was there a certain thing that piqued your interest or someone that pushed you in this direction?
Yeah, nobody pushed me in it. I was always interested in, I mean, I studied history and I was always interested in international relations and things going on. And that's really, since 90% of the threats are external to Canada, if you have a curiosity of what's going on in the world, then it's kind of easy. So I think it's just maybe I'd say intellectually I had those interests, and I had read a lot about espionage and British experiences and things like that. And I think I was always kind of more oriented towards a big organization
Okay.
as opposed to, doing my own thing. And so I kind of like that. I like being part of that and training and that camaraderie that came with
Yeah.
working for the same cause. You understand what I mean. And so then I just that my loyalty automatically just went to that organization and the Canadian government, and it was a good ride.
Yeah.
Worked overseas a lot, worked 3 different regions in Canada, did my tours of headquarters. It's a very centralized organization, so you do have to come into Ottawa, and you do have to do your time in Ottawa. And met a lot of people I trained with and friends for life.
Hmm.
People from that first 6 months at Camp Borden, you just get very tight, and so you just I still we still get together now and then. Some of us.
Well, and even like you're saying a bit about on the commitment piece, and then you talk about the camaraderie. That's something that I find very important with this job, especially
Mhm.
being in law enforcement in general. I imagine security kind of runs along the same lines. Um, and I know one of the things we were talking about before was human sources. So
Yeah,
mentioned a lot of the work you've done is in that world.
yeah,
Um, if you want to talk about commitment, I think people don't realize when you're handling sources, like if you really want to be good at it, I mean, that is a huge time commitment
yeah,
when you got people calling you at all hours of the day with literally every problem under the sun.
yeah. It
Because you can be their best friend and you're like a shoulder to cry on, all the way to national security issues, and you're trying to rally the troops and prevent something major or big from happening. So did you find that in the source world, was it a huge time commitment for you in the realm that you were kind of operating in?
yeah,
Like, you have people calling you all the time?
yeah. Not so much calling me all the time, but I really like what you said about shoulder to cry on, because
Mm,
my mantra has always been a good source handler is a therapist.
yeah.
You really are, because you 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 have to invest the time and you have to listen. And the main reason is for security reasons. You have to know your source. You have to know their threshold for stress. You have to know what's going on in their life. Sometimes personal life can actually be more significant than informing on the bad guys.
Yeah.
And so you do have to have time. And I can remember quite junior in my career. I remember one guy, he ended up being a really good source. I saw him like 8 times before he actually came across and told me anything.
Hmm.
Because they're kind of assessing you and putting you off, and, "Oh, I can't meet. I'm busy," and go away. You get used to that a lot because they're scared. They don't wanna talk to you. But I was persistent, and I would go back out and see him and try to see him, and then finally at one point, he just told me something about the target of investigation. I was like, "Wow." So I used to, years later, when I was talking to younger intelligence officers, I would say, they're assessing you, and you don't just talk to somebody 2 or 3 times and they're a source. Um, you have to convey a certain confidence on their part that you're for real,
Yeah.
and like you say, calls all the night, and and that you're there for them. But at the same time, you're professional. They may see you as their best friend and knowing all about their secret life, but you can't ever let your guard down, in the sense that as much as you like the person, and a couple people I think the most respect, admiration I've ever had for people, but at the same time, you're always listening to what they're saying, and you're thinking, any chance that maybe they're getting something that's false, or maybe they've turned and they're working for the bad guys. So you're always kind of
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're not trusting them, but you always have to be professional. Whereas you create the illusion that you're best friends, because that's important. You are very important to them, but you still got to be, I guess, a little cold and analytical in terms of things can happen in a person's life
Yeah.
and that.
I think you always have that in the back of your mind. It's just the roles, right? And you, at the end of the day, are still law enforcement or working in the security area. So if you get something that you can use that's safe and nobody's going to die from it, and whatever other checks you have to do, you're looking to use that information. But yeah, you definitely have to be a certain type of person, I think, to
Yeah,
handle informants. And just that level of commitment there is pretty big. I think it's hard to convey a lot of this because a lot of this world is so secretive
yeah,
and you can't tell any of the information. So, like, how do we get this across to people? And you're talking about teaching some of the some of this to the
yeah,
younger generation. You said that you had recently taught one of the a police service
yeah.
about source handling. Can you just talk a bit about that course?
Yeah, I do some consulting on it, and I did deal with one, and I'm glad you asked because I think it's much harder for law enforcement in terms of recruiting informants and managing informants than it is for an intelligence service. And I have exposure to all sorts of police agencies, and obviously the RCMP, but you know, law enforcement exists, as you well know, to prosecute people.
Hmm.
And the end game ideally is you're going to be in court. So you're looking for someone who's going to give you evidence and who is going to be 100% firm. They're going to show up in court and and I guess be a good police agent. And that's hard. That's harder than in a lot of national security work. And I probably have colleagues that say, "Oh no, Dan, it's really hard to get." Yes, it's sometimes it's really hard to get a source with the right motivation and access. National security work, but in national security work, you're less likely to have a source who may have a criminal record, who may still be involved in crimes, who may have substance abuse issues, maybe addictions, and at the same time, you're anticipating how the defense is going to be dealing with them as a witness and all that. And so that's why I have a lot of respect for what law enforcement has to deal with in terms of, they call it informant um, handling and management, because you probably have people, you would know this more than I do, you probably have people that can be more difficult to manage.
Yeah.
Well, we've had people like in National Code, I've had sources that are really hard to manage, are really manipulative, and they're really good at lying to the bad guys. But you're less likely to have people that are going to have all this other stuff going on in their life that is like, oh, just could complicate.
I think the big difference too would be the difference between the using stuff for evidence or intelligence. So maybe more on the intelligence side,
Yeah,
you're not necessarily going to compel that person to court. They remain a true informant, not an
yeah,
agent. They don't switch to that side of things. Whereas for police, a lot of what we want to do is gather evidence, something we have to present in court. So you're trying to keep that person as an informant in some cases where you don't want to reveal their identity. Um, they're just a number, and only the handler ends up in court,
yeah,
basically to say nothing. But yeah, so there's definitely that element. I think a lot of the police come across most of their informants through crime, right? Like you show up to a
true.
call and
Yeah,
you end up talking to somebody and you start building that relationship, especially if you see repeat customers. You're constantly at this person's door, like you develop a relationship with them, professional one, and then you kind of go from
yeah.
there. Hey, can I get some information that helps us stop whatever it is we want to stop? So, um, yeah, yeah. Do you enjoy the teaching aspect now? I guess that's like a big part of what you're doing after.
Yeah, I do. I like it because, like I say, it's the same. I don't want to say same principles, but it's kind of the same psychology.
Hmm.
Whether it's national security or whether it's we'll just say law enforcement. You know, you're like I talked to you before about the time investment and knowing the source and things like that, and trying to identify who has access and managing the relationship, and even work, what's called UC work or undercover work, which has always interested me. Like a lot of people, I've read a lot about, police stories and Donnie Brasco and things like that. And it is still, even though it's a police officer, it is still linked to the fundamentals of source management, and getting the right access and what limits as far as they can do and challenges. And what I like is that idea of a good source operation where, the source creates the illusion with the targets
Mm.
of who he is, right? It could be a biker gang, it could be terrorist group. It's still the same thing. They're letting them believe what they want to believe so that he or she can do their job and get the information or I guess get the evidence on that. And I find that interesting. And I also use some of that, what we look at, let's say in national security work, as recruitability indicators. Let's say you want to recruit somebody, like a really high priority target, somebody in the intelligence world. The things we look at to make them recruitable are also, from the other side of the coin, vulnerabilities and insider threat. So I also teach a course on insider threat, moles, leakers, which is kind of in vogue these days.
Yeah.
But the things that we look to exploit in getting a source against these various targets are also the things that organizations and intelligence services and police forces and everything else are looking to protect against, which is those same kind of vulnerabilities and things. So it sounds like I'm talking in circles, but it's all got to do with human behavior. And I think the fact that I find human behavior interesting and unpredictable, that when we get into things like sources and informants and that, yeah, I actually really enjoy the discussion. And when people have questions or they'll say, how do you know they're telling the truth, or vetting and stuff. And it's just, it's all common sense stuff. It's stuff that organizations have been doing for years. And we find that we all have the same questions.
Yeah.
We all have the same doubts as to whether someone's being true, because that's ultimately the end of it. What we're doing is we're trying to get the truth, trying to get solid, useful information and reliable information. And there's these processes we just have to go through to make sure we're not getting it. I also teach a course that's got fabrications. Part of the afternoon is on fabricators, because they've often are the bane of intelligence work. You get people that make up these narratives, and it's the same thing. It's trying to elicit the truth.
What are they fabricating for? Like, what's their intention?
It's a whole bunch of reasons. Usually it could be money, it could be attention. Sometimes it's attention. Sometimes there's one now, it's common information. Not common information, it's public information, a plot to kill Obama, I think, at the inauguration. And I remember I was in Vancouver at the time, and we later learned someone walked into an embassy in Africa, an American embassy, and had this story of these individuals in North America, including Canada, of Somali background, were going to kill Obama.
Oh.
And he wanted money. And I think it was an FBI or somebody in the FBI later came in and said, hey, I've heard this story before, blah, 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 blah. It's a fabricator. But they usually have a short period of time for you to make a decision.
Yeah.
And they want something. And there's so there's certain little flags you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but again, it's the same thing. It's like we can get all the toys and polygraph machines and everything we want, but um, it's a matter of the human. I guess you could say the human element, where you just after a while you can discern there's something funny here. You know,
Yeah.
this just isn't. It's too good to be true, and if it's too good to be true, chances are he's making it up, or somebody in is making it up and telling him.
We could have all the fancy technology and, equations and the physics of everything. And as soon as you throw a human in there, it all goes to hell. And
Yeah,
you never know which way it's going to go because people just change on a dime sometimes. And yeah, it's a fun world, but boy, is it stressful sometimes.
yeah, I have to test my own challenge my own bias sometimes. I used to always be skeptical, and I remember one time I had a source, and it was always this was real, but there was a part I thought he was spinning.
Oh, yeah.
I was positive he was making it up, and it just didn't make sense. And then I found out later I was wrong.
Oh, really?
You know,
Okay. Yeah.
you just sometimes you can overthink things, and not to say I'm never wrong. I'm occasionally wrong, but you can be a little too skeptical sometimes, and you know maybe sometimes what's presented to you is true.
Mm.
I bring my own biases to it. Uh, Maybe having dealt with people that lie.
Yeah. It could put up like a few walls. Maybe you become a little more skeptical of what people say. Like it's just based on all your prior experience, right?
Yes.
And especially if you get burned a few times, then you really start kind of getting on the defensive. Um, yeah, I mean, that's just through experience. So, um, on a lot of these topics, though, and like you're saying, a lot of this stuff kind of in vogue nowadays. Maybe we'll kind of move to like a bigger picture issue. So, just talking about national security, I kind of wanted to get your opinion to start on just where Canada kind of lies in the whole scheme of things right now.
Yeah.
See lots of articles about reputation. So
Yeah.
when it comes to Canada and their reputation among the Five Eyes, where do you see us kind of situated right now? And do people still trust us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I know I worked with there's 12 partners. I think I worked with 9 or 10 of them of the Five Eyes. I mean, closely. This is SIGINT as well as the HUMINT agencies that we conventionally regard as the Five Eyes. And the relationship was always good. Canada is seen as, in many ways, what we call a niche provider, because we don't have, global intelligence collection with ISI and CSIS and some other partners. But in those areas that in my view, we always fought above our punching weight. And in other areas, we're more of a receiver, like in what we call non-threat foreign intelligence. What I'm a little concerned with recently is some of the effects of the leaks.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there have been leaks. There have been pre-China Gate. I call it the China foreign interference China Gate leaks that probably a lot of people didn't notice. And then there's been some recent leaks on the India business.
Yes.
And while I think the China ones were more domestic, I think the India ones, I can't doubt that there's some discussion somewhere. Maybe what are the Canadians doing? This is the latest stuff on India and the killing of Mr. Nijar and things like that. And I have no problem with the veracity of the information, either the Five Eyes or Canadian intelligence. But I wonder if somebody is thinking at some point what goes on, and then we have a case, as you know, in Ottawa with the Ortiz case as well.
Yeah. The trial with Cameron Ortiz.
Yeah, and that's not a pretty case. What has been released in the public, as you know, they think for the last 2 weeks they've clamped down on the public aspect of the trial. So while we haven't had the Delisles and not the Delisles, the Snowdens and all the leaks, let's say the U.S. had, I do think some of the more recent leaks maybe they are injurious to national security. I can't say it isn't. I know it's probably injurious to CSIS in terms of getting future sources. But I'd say, yeah, I think our brand has probably been dented a bit. And then let's get outside of the intel agencies, just the whole issue of Canada's contribution to the military and NATO and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, I've been retired for, I guess, 4 years now, government service, but I can't help but think that that doesn't put Canada a couple notches lower than where it used to be in terms of, their own weight, I guess.
So kind of the totality of it all.
Yeah,
Like
that's
you're
what I meant.
saying, just everything. Yeah, I could kind of see that. Like I see some of the news that we might not be included in some discussions when it comes to partners from the Five Eyes. We get left out, but I've also read a lot of things where it says, yeah, like you're saying, we're a net importer of the security information. We don't necessarily have the reach like the U.S. or the Brits might have
Yeah.
when you come to the foreign intelligence. Um, but do you think we like when it comes to the leaks, are we doing a disservice to ourselves more, or is it is it just people getting kind of annoyed or at the lack of attention that's being paid to these things? So when you look at how many things have come out about, we've briefed the PMO's office on you know 100 things, and this goes all the way back to you could go back to like Sidewinder. Um, this stuff's been ignored for so long. So I kind of wonder, like, at what point when people are like, this is an actual national security issue. It's not just I'm doing it to be cool or I'm getting paid some money by somebody, but
Yeah.
like people are getting hurt. We have infiltration in elections or whatever it might be, the allegations. At what point do you go, okay, I need to get this out at some point, some way?
Yeah.
So is it more of detriment to us in the reputation sense as opposed to security side of things?
Yeah, I think it's more damaging to Canada than the Five Eyes. I mean, let's look at it this way, and we'll leave Sidewinder aside. I have some views on that, but
Mm,
but if you look at espionage cases and attempted espionage cases, the only one that was prosecuted was Jeffrey Delisle because he pled guilty and he was
okay.
sentenced and put on parole. So he was working for Russian intelligence. Very, very damaging source, according to General Petraeus, when he was director of CIA, was one of the worst in the Five Eyes up until 2012, I think it was. We had another case, I'd say but there was a case of a fellow in the Toronto area who offered his services to the Chinese. And after 8 years of languishing, where the Crown couldn't, I guess, determine what they wanted to disclose in court, the judge threw it out, acquitted it.
Mm.
As time, what is it? Justice delayed is justice not served. And there's been a few other cases. And now we've got the Ortiz case. So, and I said this in one of my media interviews, they just didn't, they had enough of me. They only put a few seconds in. But what I said was, if we don't see a successful prosecution on violations of the Security Information Act, the SOIA as they call it, then the message is really that you can get away with this in Canada. You can get away with attempted espionage. You can get away with espionage. You can do, in this case, leaking. I know he leaked to I think it was a foreign criminal or things like that, and took a lot of documents home. But I think the message to Canadians is you can get away with it. And I think that's where you ask the question, where's the damage? Is it the Five Eyes? I think it's more ourselves, because the idea of we may have in ways made it permissible
Mhm.
that people can leak, that people can make that decision that I'm right, government's not doing what I want them to do, and I can leak. And that's why these cases, I think they have impacted Canada's brand a bit internationally, but I think the worst is the message in Canada is that unless you plead guilty, the government can't really prosecute you for being a mole or leaking.
So is that more a problem with we don't have the proper laws on the books, or are we just not enforcing the laws that we have? Or maybe even a third is you just don't have the right people or the knowledge of how to kind of go after those type of issues.
Yeah, I think it would take a couple of days to answer that one, but I think in a
Okay.
nutshell, we have all these issues coming in at the same time. We have the intelligence to evidence conundrum, which
Yep.
has been getting better. Justice is dealing with it. I think Parliament needs to do some tweaking with the legislation. We've got the perception is a lack of will, I think,
Yeah.
with the government. Um, and maybe it's because, in some ways, and this may sound contradictory, because Canada hasn't been suffering from the national security threats that a lot of other countries have worse. They've had worse cases, not just terrorism, but espionage, that we sort of have had the luxury and not taken these cases as seriously as we have. I'm sure there's lawyers in the Crown and Justice Department who are frustrated. There has to be. But we need somebody to sort of pull it all together and say, okay, let's look at the legislation. Okay, I gave testimony twice at House of Commons on foreign interference. And we do have legislation, the Security of Information Act. You can prosecute foreign
Hmm.
interference. But they hadn't really done that until some charges recently. And my understanding from people that are lawyers is these legislations need some tweaking, some amendments that need to be made. But it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of getting government to do that and getting the current government maybe push to have these changes done so you can get a prosecution.
Yeah.
Because our allies are able to do this. I mean, the Americans just sentenced this guy, Jason Schultz. He was a contractor, CIA. He dumped all these tools internationally. He got something like 80 years.
Oh, wow.
The Germans, I think I think there's a Brit was selling stuff to the Russians. I think he got a pretty good conviction. So we are looking kind of a little weak
Yeah.
in counter espionage.
I think honestly, it's through the whole justice system. This is like right down to petty theft. We just like we're tossing so much in the courts now. We see like
Yeah,
serious ag assaults. We see people get stabbed and like it just gets tossed, and
yeah,
the crown just doesn't have time for it in the day. They're running
yeah,
50 other trials, and they can't get to it or something. So we've had stuff tossed out. We've had serious files where they find the smallest reason to throw it out,
yeah,
and like we'll go and have a debate in a crown's office, and you'll see it's like, really, you're tossing it for that. Like, I think it's more bringing the justice system into disrepute by not going ahead and just saying, hey, we might have stepped on someone's rights, but we were, right in 9 out of 10 of the steps. Like, I think this is a very minor infraction.
yeah,
No, just toss it. So it is, yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the will. We're missing the people who really have that kind of the gusto, the drive to
yeah,
just be like, I'm going to go ahead with this. So
yeah.
I agree with you totally.
And I mean, to be fair, too, not to be just totally depressing. Um, you know, there are things that go on in national security world that don't involve prosecutions. I mean, there's
Mhm.
like the day-to-day stuff, just as I'm sure with law enforcement, you've got a police officer on patrol. He's not always arresting someone, or he or she isn't arresting someone. So, CSIS has this disruptive activities mandate, and there's a lot that goes on, especially in counterintelligence, where you don't end up with someone uh, necessarily prosecuted because CSIS doesn't think that way. They're
Yep.
not hardwired to that, and they don't need to. That's what you got law enforcement for. You also look at it positively. In my opinion, I worked 12 years counterterrorism. I managed the national program at one point when it was really bad. Um, Islamic extremism influenced Al Qaeda, ISIS influenced terrorism. It does not seem to be a problem in Canada. I'm quite sure, unless it's all being disrupted. It's nothing like it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Nothing like when Corporal Cirillo was killed and the other I forget his name fellow in I think in the reserve side
Quebec.
in Quebec. Yeah, and now we've got right wing extremism. I've seen the RCMP has laid some charges on a couple of guys recently on the far right. So in terms of terrorism, it really is manageable in a way, and the threat levels have diminished to the point that when we talk about national security, we have to sort of relook at it. We look at foreign interference, and I've been going around talking about this. It is a problem. It is a serious problem, not just China, India, Iran, Russia to a certain degree. And that's where I think our lack of leadership and action, let's say, or policy incomes are costing us. So it's kind of like, if we look back in the last 5 or 6 years, or 10 years ago would be accurate, we were seized with terrorism issues while still working counterintelligence, Russia, China, everything else, and some other stuff. And now that stuff is diminished, but we realize now we're, I'd say, almost overwhelmed with these state actors.
Okay.
These malignant, blind state actors with foreign interference in Canada. And that's where, again, I've talked a lot about this, we have to sort of have a rethink in terms of national security instead of just the hard espionage cases, terrorism cases. We now have to look at the more subtle but just as damaging foreign interference activities. And I think that's been neglected. Not the only one, I think you said that. And the country's trying to do a catch up on it. So it's sort of like not bad national security in Canada, but if we look at it from foreign interference, maybe we don't know everything.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I think on some things we'll obviously be a bit better on some things than others. There's always room for improvement. Do you think that we have the right organizations? So between the RCMP, CSIS, CSE, do we need more organizations looking at certain things? Do we need to kind of narrow some mandates down of some people and have some other
No,
organizations created? Or
no. The problem isn't the organizations that are collecting it. The problem is what we refer to as the machinery of government, the policy outcomes side.
Hmm.
So you've got CSIS doing its job, you got the RCMP doing its job, you got CSE doing their job. They work this file as well. And then, as we know on China, the reporting goes into government, and either people don't read it, or people read it and don't see it as actionable. So whether this is electoral interference, harassment of MPs, we've seen this in committee testimony. That side of the intelligence world, the policy outcome world, the machinery government world, in my opinion, has been somewhat dysfunctional in that they don't do it. It's not a question that does CSIS need more resources or do they need their mandate to change. Their mandate changed significantly in 2016 with disruptive powers. They've got all sorts of resources. And I think the RCMP as well. The problem is when you look at the prosecution side of foreign interference, I think it was the new commissioner or the interim commissioner said at the time, well, we need to fix the intel evidence thing.
Okay.
The RCMP to do it. And I respectfully beg to differ. If you have the legislation, the RCMP can collect the evidence on foreign interference. That's their métier. That's what they do. They collect the evidence on it. But I think it's a matter of, refocusing a bit how the agencies work and having the policymakers take some leadership on this.
Yeah.
Instead of now, because the government is basically under siege with these allegations on China, they're just in this kind of defensive mode. Well, here's an inquiry, go away. And that's why with the hearings, the way the momentum was going, I was thinking, great, we're going to have somebody take this on. And one of the former national security advisors, the prime minister, in his testimony, he actually said that he had gotten together these deputy ministers in a committee to try to, I say, handle the reporting, handle this beast. But it's on the policy outcome end that there needs to be some adjustments and some leadership, because the ones collecting the intelligence, they're doing a fine job.
Yeah.
It's just you have to read the reports.
I'd almost try and find the bottleneck where all these reports go to die and then see what's that person doing. right?
I
Because
know.
it's like maybe that person's one of the foreign influence people and they just kill all the stuff
Well,
before it gets read or anyone cares about it.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't give them that credit, but it's frustrating because you know how much work goes into this. You know there's a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know there's a lot of personal human risk. And then the reporting goes in, and to see people say, well, we didn't read it, or their staff didn't brief them up, or a minister wasn't able to get into his emails, or CSIS didn't tell him, or stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, will you shoot me, please? And I don't mean that in a personal way. I know people are busy, and I know public servants are busy. It's just you have so much this side of the house that have to comply with policies that are reviewed by review bodies that are accountable. When I was a manager in ops, I was personally accountable in some ways in terms of liability. And yet, this other side of the house, we'll call it the machinery of government, they're only accountable to their minister. And then the ministers are saying, well, I didn't get the reports.
Yeah.
And that's really, if I had one wish list from this inquiry, that's the side that needs to be fixed. It's not give CSIS more surveillance cars or give the Mounties more money. That'd be nice, but it's to act on the intelligence. And we have a culture in this country, long before either of us were born, that just does not know that they can use intelligence in their
Yeah.
policy or whatever department they're in.
We see that on even in policing where we're sitting on like hordes of information and intelligence, but nobody does anything with it.
Yeah,
And a part of that is people either don't know how to incorporate it and like put it into action. A lot of people are actually scared to because they think they're just going to get somebody killed or something might,
right.
really bad will happen and then it's on them. So those are kind of the two of the biggest things that I've seen when you have the intel and people don't want to use it. There's also parts ego and different things where people just hoard it to be the single source of everything and
Yeah,
everybody has to come to me. But that's more of on the policing side that I've seen that. Do you think when like you went and testified twice in front of the House of Commons,
yeah.
do you think those um, doing those kind of things really helps get through to some of the politicians? Is that where maybe we need more of that? Because if reports, you're putting all the time and effort into reports and it's not going where it's supposed to or it's not getting read, just kind of skipping all the middle people and go straight to them face to face and say, this is what's going on in your backyard.
Yeah.
Like, do you find that's more effective?
I think it does. I mean, I've had I've had some MPs speak to me afterwards, and they have thanked me, and
Okay.
it's not just for partisan reasons, um, and of various parties, and I think it's because I was obviously in a sympathetic position, in terms of Michael Chong, the MP
Yeah.
from that Richmond Hill, that he should have been told. I actually said that in my testimony, regardless of policymakers, he should have told him. So I think it's gone over. I think people that testify and say, look, because I have to stick to the Security of Information Act, I can't breach that. But I'm in a sort of a generic way. I'm saying, look, this is not working. Here's why. And I think they've appreciated that. And I think with all the testimony, certainly not mine, but all the testimony they had earlier this year led to, in some ways, this inquiry, because through the media, because the media has been reporting on this, media has kind of got the government to do things. It got the government to kick out a Chinese diplomat that secret reports wouldn't do. And so they picked that up.
I find it's the media starts saying something and then the politicians react, and it gives the feeling that it's only for
Sure.
votes, though. Like it doesn't come across as sincere once you get to that point. It's like you have your security and intelligence services, like the experts in
Yeah.
this, telling you something. You think that would be the most important people to listen to, but it's not until it gets to the media where somebody then is turning it into a pandemic, epidemic of whatever is going on. so that comes across as,
Yeah,
not really sincere. And then that kind of goes back to the earlier point where I'm saying, you get people who are like
yeah,
pushing things for years and years and years saying, hey, this is happening. Okay, nobody's doing anything with this and we're going to have a major problem. Here you go. Now you start getting leaks. So I think it comes down to a lot of the leadership, and we need some
yeah,
better leadership where they're actually listening to these things, and even having the right people in between who know how to act on certain things or
yeah.
what information to pass along. I think that's missing.
It is, and I think with, like, for example, the China business, probably over the summer, the government realized they were looking weak in terms of national security with all these allegations. The three main MPs were being harassed, all this stuff. And then you get the threat of a leak regarding India. So, what does the prime minister do? Does he sit on it and Canadians learn from the media? No, because they realize, I think, at the end of the day, it is votes, but it's also, if you're not going to put the safety and security of Canadians first, you're finished in an election.
Mhm.
I mean, you talk about carbon
Yes.
tax, you could talk about inflation, you could talk about getting the grocery heads in for a meeting. If you are seen to not put the safety and security of Canadians, whether it's a hostile intelligence service collecting information or whether it's a state murdering somebody, you're toast. And I think the government realized on China, the perception may not be the real
Yeah.
in the public is that they've sort of dropped the ball on Chinese foreign interference for years. And so that's why in the India case, and I don't think they necessarily handled it right, they realized if we're seen to be the last one on the block to know about this, because it came out in the Globe and Mail, we're finished. So then that's where the prime minister makes his
Yeah.
declaration in the House and all sorts of ramifications there. But I think that,
Especially in our own backyard, right?
especially in our own backyard, and exactly, and it's a
Yeah.
Canadian, and so I think the realization is people say, okay, elections, national security doesn't matter, and there's a grain of truth to that. Canadians care about gas for their car and everything else, and kids in schools, and but I think if it increasingly becomes the view of the public that the government has been kind of weak on the national security file, that can harm them at the polls. And so that's why I'm still a bit bewildered.
Yes.
We don't have a registry, foreign agent registry. I'm still bewildered the way they handled the inquiry, fobbing it off to the opposition, the silence on it. And I guess it's just maybe they're just under siege politically and with the polls. And then Canadians are
Yeah.
wondering what gives.
Well, and you know what? Maybe that kind of leads into one of the things I was going to talk about is how do you educate the public on any of this stuff? Because even from my perspective in law enforcement, where we're not necessarily dealing with national security issues day to day, but you kind of get like little hints of it here and there, or maybe you hear things in certain conversations. But I mean, we're not like super far on the outside of that world.
Yeah,
But boy, when you try to talk to people about it, even police,
I know.
it's like you're speaking another language, and do they care? Well, maybe they care, but I think they only care about as much
Yeah,
as the general public. So, how do you educate the public and also get them? I want to say maybe motivated is the word to do something about it with their votes or
I
lobbying or
know.
whatever it might be. But how do you explain all this to people? Because it's boy, it feels like we're way behind.
It is. It's a good question, and it's one of my former directors, Ward Elcock. He made these comments in a media interview. This was back, I think, in the winter or spring. He said, "Look," he said, "politicians are very smart people. They they will make the issues they believe their constituents want to talk about and are concerned about. So if Canadians aren't concerned about national security, then why are the politicians they're not going to be concerned about national security. I think they become concerned about
Mm.
national security because what we've seen with this Chinagate business is that members of parliament and at a provincial and municipal level, politicians have been targeted by foreign states. And I think that's what's different this
Yeah.
year, in the past year, than ever before. Is, and this sounds cynical, but yeah, it's okay if it's the Chinese Canadian community and police stations and all that. Okay, yeah, if it's a Sikh community and India's interfering, there's a tolerance there. But now we're seeing that they're actually targeting politicians, that they may actually be interfering in the ridings. They may actually have tried to change the way of elections going. Now we've got their attention because that's their business.
Yeah, but even the diasporas, right? You've got all these people over here that are
Yeah.
kind of have people making threats to them or their families back home. And it's like, well, there's your voting group right there, right? They're the ones getting uh, attacked or affected or whatever it might be. So, yeah, it's just surprising. It's what a beast of an issue to try and tackle.
It is. And the media, I mean, there's only so many. I've done media interviews. Somebody reached out to me in November, and that's how it started. And I'm helpful, try to be helpful in explaining to, because a lot of them don't understand it. And there's not as lot, the media community in Canada isn't as big as people think. Not a lot of journalists, not a lot of reporters. You get some of them, you get Sam Cooper, you get some others that have been on the file for a while, but they've been learning and they've been acquiring it. But it's a matter of they've got so many issues to deal with. Like I think it was the day after the Prime Minister's announcement. There's an election in Manitoba, a new premier. There's this, and then there's Gaza and Israel, and just that little moment there of a soundbite for 30 seconds. I had one reporter talk to me about a
Yeah.
shooting in Winnipeg. It was a person of Sikh background, and we
Yeah.
had a good long chat, and then she did a good clip on it, but it was trying to fit that into what CTV News is covering that whole evening. It's just like it's little bit like that, and so yeah, Canadians, they're going to react to what excuse me, what they see in the media, and form their own
Mhm.
judgments. And so I think part of it is because we're lucky. We're a country that hasn't been invaded, and I still say we haven't been under siege of the national security issues some other countries have, and so that allows Canadians to think everything's wonderful. And with foreign interference, I'll be frank, it's very gray, and you have to study it and look at it closely to realize the threat. So for some Canadians, it's probably like, well, I don't know what
Yeah.
this is all about. Trudeau Foundation, who cares?
Yeah, and I get from the political side. Sometimes they'll say, I don't want to just go out and say China's, subverting all these processes we have, and they're doing all this influence because they're scared that it's gonna make people like resort to hate crimes and attack
Yes.
people in the Chinese community. But I think that just comes down to a lot of the messaging. If there's people who are willing to do that, they already got those thoughts. Maybe it makes them feel like they can go out and do that, but I don't think we're going to convert all of a sudden the populace into a bunch of people who hate a certain group or another.
No.
I think it comes down to a lot of the messaging around that, and I think there's got to be a way that we can educate people safely, but also
Mhm.
get some of the information out there. And that is one of the things I see in law enforcement, but I imagine it's the same in your world, where the organizations are afraid or reluctant, I'll say,
Yeah.
to share information. And it's like, I think we can put a lot more out there and do it safely.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some kind of middle ground.
There can be, and you look at, I think there's more CSIS can say, there's more CSE can say, coming from an organization 31 years where, we didn't say anything. You see recently the Five Eyes, the HUMINT partners, or most of the HUMINT partners in the States, including Director Vigino, were there, and they were actually quite I felt they said quite a lot in terms of not just China and Russia, but in terms of protecting IP and universities and private sector. And so those things are good because it's an effort you're hearing it from government. They're saying, okay, here's the threat. We're not going to get into the details. That'll never happen.
Yeah.
But we'll tell you that because when government doesn't say anything but puts out some unclassified brochure every now and then, it's easy for Canadians to then say, well, maybe they're not being straight with us and maybe the threat is worse. I'm a big believer that security intelligence agencies should say more.
Hmm.
I think they can disclose more. It's not going to be the end of the world. Still protect sources. And government writ large should more. And stands as cyber in terms of how private sector is being targeted by foreign state actors in the cyber world. Let's give private industry a little support here,
Yes.
a little help,
Yeah.
instead of just keeping it all inside. Maybe deal with them just unilaterally. You don't have to tell everybody, but I think government does need to just disseminate a bit more than they have.
Yeah. And I think you had a good point there with um, working with some of the partners. So look at private industry. What can they do for us? What can we do for them? They've
Yeah,
got different resources. They also don't have to play by certain rules that we do.
no,
So they can operate in different realms. You look at journalists. There's a lot of journalists putting stuff out that maybe they can take on certain type of risks that intelligence or a police agency can't. There's
yeah,
just a lot of different avenues to go down. We're coming up. We're pretty much right on time. I'll make sure I get you onto your next thing. Um,
okay.
I just want to give you a second to say any current projects you got on the go, or any other. I guess you're teaching, and then where people can find you, follow your work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out there. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, maybe too much, but we got a great program, U Ottawa. I'm director of the national security there, and what we're really doing is we're expanding the parameters of what people see as national security. That it's not just terrorism and espionage. There's issues.
Hmm.
Talk about Arctic. We can talk about various things, and it's all about literacy. We are trying to raise that literacy level and Canadians at least appreciate, demystify it a bit.
Hmm.
It's not all super secret, and have more participation. Have people talk about it, and so we try through professional development and teaching. I think it works well. We have some morning briefs. Got a couple more scheduled. We're going to have some online, and it's just to have Canadians talk about it
Yeah.
because, like your point, what's the impact of this? What's the Five Eyes, the brand? It's ultimately what it matters to Canadians, and it's what's the messaging for Canadians. Because we don't worry too much about what the rest of the world thinks, but I'm concerned about what Canadians think and know.
Well, and even on that, I think it's very important that people just ask the questions and have a discussion about it. Don't have to
No,
shout and scream, but because we get nowhere and get nothing done. But yeah, even if you don't end up working in this realm,
yeah,
just don't be afraid to ask questions and learn, because it is important, and at some point, some way, it could have an effect on you. So
yeah.
it's good to know.
Mm.
So I'll post some links to your social media, but yeah, just hang on the line for 2 seconds. I'll say bye offline. But thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Nathan. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.